My beloved child, something hidden just changed direction, and the person who thought their words would remain unnoticed has no idea your soulmate is beginning to understand the pattern. For a while, it seemed harmless. A passing remark here. A strange comparison there. That third party kept bringing up your appearance in conversations where your name should never have become the center of attention. They would mention the way you carry yourself, the way your presence changes a room, even small details about your body, as though they were trying to place an image of you inside everyone else's mind. But something never quite added up. Why would someone talk so much about a person they claimed wasn't important? Your soulmate finally asked that question. And the moment they did, everything began to look different. Stay close to this moment, because the answer was not what they expected. At first, your soulmate assumed these comments were simply random observations. Yet the same strange description kept returning. Different conversations. Different people. Almost the same message. You know who they look like. And then the third party would stop. A pause. A knowing expression. A sentence left unfinished. It was almost as if the unfinished part mattered more than anything they actually said. Your soulmate noticed. Not immediately. But once they saw it, they could no longer unsee it. There was a pattern beneath the words. The third party wasn't really trying to describe your body. They were trying to shape how other people perceived you before those people had the chance to discover you for themselves. Think about that. What if someone speaks about your appearance again and again because your presence creates a reaction they cannot easily explain? What if the comparison isn't about what you look like at all? Your soulmate is beginning to believe that is exactly what happened. Because something unexpected occurred during the most recent conversation. The third party started describing you again. They talked about your face. Your presence. The unusual way people seem to remember you after even a brief encounter. Then they nearly completed the sentence they had avoided for so long. They look like a silence. Your soulmate watched them carefully. And this time, instead of allowing the subject to change, they asked one simple question. Why do you keep saying that about them? Everything shifted. The third party suddenly had to explain a story they had been hiding behind jokes, comparisons, and half-finished sentences. And that explanation revealed something your soulmate had never considered. This person had noticed something about you long before your soulmate realized it themselves. Not a flaw. Not something you needed to change. Something far more intriguing. You carry a quality that makes people compare you to an image already stored inside their memory, someone unforgettable. Someone whose energy seemed larger than the room around them. But here is where the mystery deepens. The third party wasn't telling everyone because they wanted people to laugh. They were telling everyone because they wanted confirmation. They needed someone else to see what they were seeing. And when nobody reacted the way they expected, they kept repeating it. Again. And again. Almost as though they were trying to solve you. Your soulmate now understands that those comments were never really about your body. They were clues. Clues pointing towards something about your identity, your presence, and the reason certain people become strangely curious whenever you appear. And there is one detail your soulmate discovered that changes the entire meaning of that unfinished sentence. Because they finally learned who the third party has secretly been comparing you to. And once you hear why that comparison matters, you may understand why they could never bring themselves to finish the words out loud. Something changed the instant your soulmate heard the name behind that comparison. Because suddenly, all those strange comments made sense. The third party had not been comparing you to someone ordinary. They had been comparing you to a person from their own past, someone whose presence once carried the same impossible-to-ignore quality they now recognize in you. Not identical features. Not the same body. Not even the same style. It was something harder to explain. A certain confidence beneath silence. A way of entering a room without demanding attention, yet somehow receiving it. A strange mixture of softness and strength that made people look twice because they could not immediately understand what they were feeling. And that was the detail your soulmate had been missing. The third party kept talking about your body because physical words were the only language they knew how to use for something that was never completely physical. But there was more. Much more. Your soulmate asked another question. What happened to the person you're comparing them to? The answer changed the atmosphere. For several seconds, the third party said nothing. Then they admitted something unexpected. That person had once been underestimated by almost everyone around them. People judged what they could see. They made assumptions. They whispered. They compared. And then, slowly, that person became someone none of them could ignore. Your soulmate felt something click into place. Because suddenly this wasn't just a strange comparison anymore. It sounded almost like a prediction. Stay with this carefully. The third party had noticed a transformation beginning in you. A change that may be so gradual you haven't fully recognized it yourself. The way you stand differently after surviving moments that once made you question yourself. The way your expression has become calmer. The way you no longer need the same approval you once searched for. Something within you has been becoming visible on the outside. And people notice transformation long before they understand it. That is why the conversations kept happening. The third party wasn't simply saying, "You look like someone." What they were really trying to say was, "You remind me of someone right before their entire life changed." Now ask yourself something. What if the attention surrounding you isn't evidence that something is wrong? What if it is evidence that something new is becoming impossible to hide? Your soulmate has started looking at you differently since discovering this. Not because they suddenly care more about appearance. Quite the opposite. They are beginning to see how many parts of you they had never fully understood. Your restraint. Your resilience. The way you can remain gentle without becoming weak. The way you can carry uncertainty and still move forward. And perhaps most surprisingly, the third party noticed those things first. There is an irony in that. Someone who kept talking about the surface accidentally revealed what was happening underneath. If this story is speaking to something you felt but never been able to explain, share it with someone who might need that reminder too. And if you want to stay connected to this journey, leave a comment and subscribe, because the next part of this revelation goes somewhere even your soulmate did not expect. Because there was still one question left. Why was the third party telling everyone? Why not keep the comparison private? Your soulmate finally asked. And this time, the answer wasn't hesitation. It was a confession. The third party admitted they had been watching how people reacted whenever your name entered the conversation. They were testing something. Watching faces. Listening to responses. Trying to discover whether other people sensed the same unusual quality they had noticed in you. But then one person reacted differently. One person immediately understood the comparison. And what that person said afterward made your soulmate go completely quiet. Because according to them, the resemblance was never the most important part. It was what usually happened next to people who carried that same unmistakable presence. Then came the sentence no one in that room was prepared to hear. The person who understood the comparison leaned forward and said something your soulmate would remember long after the conversation ended. They don't just look like that person did. They carry the same turning point energy. For a moment, your soulmate said nothing. Because those words reached far beyond appearance. They suggested that what people had been noticing in you was connected to change. Movement. A chapter quietly preparing to close while another one was already beginning somewhere beyond what you can currently see. And suddenly, the third party's behavior looked different again. All those comments about your body. All those comparisons. All those unfinished sentences. They had been trying to explain a transformation they could sense but could not name. Stay with this part. Because your soulmate then discovered something the third party had never intended to reveal. Months earlier, they had seen you during a moment when you probably believed nobody was paying attention. You were not performing. You were not trying to impress anyone. You were simply standing somewhere quietly, lost in your own thoughts. And according to them, that was the exact moment the comparison began. Not because of your clothes. Not because of your shape. Not because of some perfect angle. It was your expression. There was something in your face that looked as though you had already outgrown a version of your life, even if you had not yet stepped into the next one. That image stayed with them. And every time they saw you afterward, it became stronger. Your soulmate listened carefully. Then came the question that changed everything again. If you saw something meaningful in them, why turn it into gossip? The third party looked down. And for the first time, there was no clever answer. Because the truth was simpler than anyone expected. They did not know how to talk about admiration without disguising it as commentary. They did not know how to say, there is something about this person that unsettles my assumptions. So they reduced something deep into something visible. They talked about your body because talking about your presence would have required honesty. And honesty would have forced them to admit that you affected them. Not romantically. Not negatively. But unmistakably. You made them question their first impression. You made them wonder whether they had misunderstood you. And perhaps most importantly, you reminded them of someone who once changed dramatically after being underestimated for too long. That was why they kept telling everyone. They were not simply describing you. They were trying to understand why your presence stayed in their mind. But your soulmate had another realization. What if the third party was never the real center of this story? What if their constant talking only created the circumstances for your soulmate to finally see something they had overlooked? Because after that conversation, your soulmate began remembering moments differently. The times you went quiet instead of defending yourself. The times you walked away from situations that no longer matched your peace. The subtle changes in your confidence. The way your energy seemed less interested in being understood and more interested in becoming authentic. That was the resemblance everyone had been struggling to name. You looked like someone entering a new era of themselves. And yet, one final piece was still missing. Your soulmate wanted to know exactly what had happened to the person you were being compared to after everyone noticed that same change. The answer was not dramatic at first. It was only 3 words. They chose themselves. But what happened immediately after that choice is the reason your soulmate suddenly began wondering whether you are approaching a decision that could reshape everything between you. What happened next turned the comparison into something far more personal than your soulmate expected. Because they chose themselves was not the end of the story. It was the beginning. The person you had been compared to eventually stopped adjusting themselves to fit every opinion surrounding them. They stopped shrinking their personality to make other people comfortable. They stopped explaining every choice, every silence, every change. And strangely, that was when everything around them began changing too. New opportunities appeared. Old relationships revealed their true nature. People who had barely noticed them before suddenly became curious. Not because their appearance had magically transformed overnight. Because their relationship with themselves had changed. Your soulmate felt the meaning of this immediately. They started wondering whether the same shift was happening inside you. Perhaps that is what the third party had been seeing all along. Not merely your body. Not merely your face. But the visible signs of someone becoming less willing to abandon themselves for acceptance. Pause on that thought. Sometimes the biggest transformation does not arrive with an announcement. It appears in smaller ways. You answer differently. You stop chasing explanations. You become more selective about where your energy goes. You begin imagining a future that actually resembles the person you are becoming. And people notice. Even those who cannot explain what they are noticing. That was why the third party kept repeating the comparison. They had seen this pattern once before. A person begins changing internally. Others focus on appearance because appearance is easier to discuss. Then suddenly everyone realizes the real transformation was never physical. It was direction. Your soulmate finally understood. But instead of feeling threatened by that realization, something unexpected happened. They became reflective. Because if you were truly entering a new chapter, one question mattered more than everything else. Would they still have a place in it? That thought stayed with them. Not from fear. From awareness. They began reviewing the way they had treated your presence. The moments they appreciated. The moments they misunderstood. The moments when they assumed there would always be more time to say what they truly meant. And for perhaps the first time, they understood why other people had become so curious about you. You were changing without asking permission. Quietly. Naturally. And that kind of transformation has a way of changing every relationship around it. If this message is reminding you of your own turning point, you can share it with someone walking through a similar season, leave a comment about what you're choosing differently now, and subscribe if you want to continue this unfolding story together. Because your soulmate was not finished asking questions. They turned back to the third party and asked something nobody had asked until then. When you tell everyone they look like that person, what exactly are you hoping they will notice? The answer came slowly. They're becoming harder to define. Your soulmate looked confused. Then the explanation arrived. The third party said that every time people tried to place you inside an old category, you seemed to evolve beyond it. Quiet became confidence. Sensitivity became discernment. Distance became direction. And what people once misunderstood about you was becoming the very quality they could no longer ignore. But there was one final detail. The third party admitted that the comparison had recently stopped feeling accurate. Because according to them, you were beginning to resemble something even the person from their past never became. Something entirely your own. And when your soulmate asked them to explain what they meant, the third party answered with a sentence that completely changed where this story was heading. The room grew strangely quiet when the third party finally said, "They don't resemble anyone anymore, that's the part one couldn't explain." Your soulmate did not answer immediately. Because after all the comparisons, all the whispered observations, all the repeated comments about your face, your body, your presence, this was the last thing they expected to hear. The comparison had disappeared. Not because the third party had changed their mind. Because you had changed beyond it. And there was something almost unsettlingly beautiful about that realization. For so long, people had tried to understand you by connecting you to something familiar. Someone from the past. A personality they already understood. An image they could easily describe. But now? Those familiar descriptions were beginning to fail. The third party admitted that the more they watched you evolve, the less certain they became about what they had originally seen. Your confidence no longer looked borrowed. Your calm no longer seemed temporary. Even the way you carried yourself had changed. Not dramatically. Not in a way that required anyone's approval. It simply felt settled. As though some invisible argument inside you had finally ended. Your soulmate heard those words and suddenly remembered something. A recent moment when you had been unusually quiet. They had wondered whether something was wrong. Now they questioned that assumption. What if you had not been withdrawing? What if you had simply stopped giving every thought, every feeling, every dream immediate access to the outside world? That possibility changed everything. Because sometimes silence is not emptiness. Sometimes silence is construction. A future being built where nobody can see it yet. And the third party had accidentally noticed the earliest signs. Here is where the story turned again. Your soulmate asked, "Then why are you still talking about their appearance?" The answer came without hesitation this time. Because that's what people notice first. But it isn't what makes them remember. That sentence stayed suspended in the air. Your soulmate understood it instantly. People might first notice your appearance. But what remained afterward was something entirely different. The way you listened. The way you could make a room feel calmer without trying. The way your energy seemed to reveal what other people were feeling about themselves. Some became comfortable around you. Others became curious. A few became unusually talkative. And some could not understand why you remained in their thoughts afterward. That was the shocking reason the third party kept speaking about your body. They had confused the doorway with the destination. Your appearance caught attention. Your presence created the memory. But there was another revelation waiting. The third party admitted that recently, people had started asking them questions about you without being prompted. Who are they really? Why do they seem different lately? Did something happen? Your soulmate listened carefully. Because apparently, the transformation was no longer visible to only one person. Others had started noticing it too. And yet the most surprising observation came from someone who barely knew you. They said you looked like a person who already knew where they were going, even if nobody else could see the destination yet. That sentence reached your soulmate differently. Because it suggested you were not simply becoming more confident. You were becoming more directed. And direction changes relationships. It changes what you tolerate. What you pursue. Who can walk beside you. Your soulmate suddenly wondered whether the future they had imagined with you still matched the future you were quietly creating. Then the third party revealed one final thing. They had heard you mentioned in another conversation very recently. But this time, nobody talked about your body. Nobody compared your face. Nobody said you looked like anyone. Instead, someone asked a question that made your soulmate's entire understanding of you shift again. Do they realize yet what they're becoming? And the answer to that question was something no one in the room expected.